Well, Robert, it's great to have you here today and running this webinar for us on design thinking and economic development. Before we get going, can you just tell me a bit about design thinking and economic development? I hear the word design thinking so often. Is it just a buzzword or is it something more?
Yes, Case, it's quite interesting how much, I suppose, buzz there is around design thinking. It's interesting today, and I'm hoping our short presentation might guide our listeners to really seeing the difference between normal practice and what design thinking is on about. And on the screen there are two very simple lines that we're going to be talking about today. But really, design thinking is, yes, it's about design. And the most important thing is design is not new. It's not as if it's a great new concept. Design's been around forever, basically. So as long as we've ever had new ideas, we've always needed a way to make those ideas happen. And really, that's what design is. It's a problem-solving process that leads to an idea, working on an idea that in a way that keeps refining it till eventually it provides the outcome that we call innovation, which really is a workable idea. An idea in itself is not innovation. An idea that works in the real world, that's really gone through a design process, that's what creates innovation. So in that sense, design's been around forever, you could say. And the other interesting point is that really, if you can drive a car, you can be a designer. Because really, design is simply a learned skill. There's nothing really magical about it. And as with car driving, well, it all depends on our own sort of different levels of application on just how we apply that skill or even our interests in it. So design's no different from that. So really when you're looking at design, it's certainly not new, and it's something we've all been doing in varying degrees for our lives. But applying the design process to business is actually the new component. And way back in about 2009, I'm sorry, there's a little stuff up in the slides. We might have to do this bit again. My slide thing's not quite working. But anyway, Tim Brown, the CEO and president of IDEO, launched the concept of corporate design thinking in 2009. And really, that was in response to the emergence of the customer-centric marketplace of the 21st century, which really, that's just a whole lot of words to say that customers now have more power and focus about what they really want, and business needs to respond to that. So the other part of design, though, is to realize that design is a transformative process. It's not a production system. And really, the purpose of design is to take a starting point which we are either wanting to change something or create a better outcome. And really, it's helping us identify the obstacles and focus on solutions that can get us to where we want to go. And really, it helps us work through a whole lot of uncertainty with identifying patterns and identifying the insights. And some of these days, you could call that wicked problems. But it really provides that clarity and action to solve the problem we're solving that we want to solve at that point in time. But it's really important not to confuse transformation with production lines. And this is the really important thing about the way often we've been delivering economic development projects. That a project journey, very much traditionally, has been a step of, we take an idea, an intent to change something or invest in an area, then we get the specialist skills to design it, and then more specialist skills to work out how to fund it, and then even more to build it, and then the users arrive, and often they hate it. And really, what that is a symptom of is not the intention, but more about the process, how we have created the sort of expert silos of production activity as we move through the project. But at each step, it takes us further and further away from the original intent. So to the point of what we actually deliver no longer reflects the values we started with. So it's this sort of iterative drifting away from the original idea. So with design thinking, it's really looking at a different way of going about delivering a project or developing a project for business. And the spiral has become quite a symbol to represent the change in process. And the background to the spiral really started to emerge in the late 1980s, and it was really through a whole lot of software development, where they were realizing that the process they were going through in this linear siloed approach, that the software outcomes, by the time they got to market, the market didn't need them anymore, or really the world had shifted on. So they were needing to find a different way to quickly iterate and change the design and get feedback from the market so they could quickly get to market and ensure they would have a viable product. And the notion of the spiral as a way of effectively using the power of feedback loops has now been broadly adopted as a symbol for innovation, and particularly looking at ways that are highly responsive to the market. And a number of innovation principles have used the spiral, and very similar to stuff we've used with the RSF spiral as well to represent an innovative process. But what the spiral really is about, it's looking at the notion of when we start a project, the why, the purpose of it, and really finding a way to travel through that journey of how we're going to deliver it to ensure that the outcome actually aligns with the original intent. And what really the spiral is, it's not just a straight line curved around and we still do the things the same way. It really is about representing continuous feedback as we move through it. So what it tries to avoid is the unintended outcomes of traditional practice, where we tend to silo and drift away from the original intent, not really feedbacking in a loop to that original intent so it can adjust and change. To really, the goal of design thinking is to have a journey that we can work through that process, that we are continuously reflecting on the why and adapting the how and even adjusting the what, so the actual outcome aligns with customer or community needs. And in that journey, it's very much about the feedback loops are about how we develop an idea from the original idea, keep testing it to get to the best idea that's still aligned with the original intentions. And that's very much, it is a linear process, but it's very much using feedback loops in that process. And one of the interesting things with projects at the moment, we're also in this other transition that in a very traditional way, we have dealt with project teams and stakeholders and advisors, and we've gone through this production line that has tended to have these silos of expertise that can allow the project to drift away from its intent. But what's also happened now, as we're moving towards business cases and investment strategies that are partnering, particularly with public monies and catalyst infrastructure, we're moving more to having to integrate investors and strategic partners that will give our employment and our other activity outcomes on the site. So in some ways, even though the old process was quite complicated, it now moves to another level of sort of complexity of stakeholders to work out a project. So what we've noticed in our trials in the last few years that there are some simple ways to look at this, which is always a purpose of design, to help provide focus and simple ways forward rather than complicating it. So what we've really identified is what we've called the Customer-Centric Network, if we're looking at economic development activities. And from a place-based point of view, the start is always with local citizens, looking at the local values that we can bring into what we could call the enterprise values for the project. So that's always a starting point. But as we move on, the idea eventually has to be solid enough to have a footprint, so it means it affects landowners, whether they're public or private. And that provides certain constraints to the idea that need to be negotiated through. But also, not only the footprint, we need to look at the site activators. So the actual activities on the site do align with the outcomes we're after. So we do attract the right users to the site. And while we're looking at that, of course, we've got to make sure we align this idea with public funding and the agencies that deliver that, because that's obviously the seed capital to provide the catalyst economic development. And of course, the fifth key partner, private investors, we need to be always mindful of how much of the de-risking we need to do with the project that we can be sure we have investment attraction happening at the end of the project development. So in the centre of that, you could say it's a design thinking round table. The trouble is, in the centre of this is not actually a table of timber, it actually is you, in the sense that the design thinking round table is the 5 stakeholders that the project facilitator needs to work through as they're developing the project concept. So what that really means in a simple way, that as we step through the process, you're actually bringing those discussions and negotiations across those 5 strategic partners as we move from the values step into a big idea, then trying to refine the best idea that could go into the business case to attract the investment, to deliver that and actually deliver the outcome that is successful. So in a really simple way, you could think of it as sort of a design thinking project board where your group of stakeholders you're working with and those feedback loops are coming from the commitment stage, which is always locally driven, and then working out what might be the biggest idea that can connect and layer all the outcomes we're after, market validate that to bring that to the best idea that is worthy of taking to a full-blown business case and effectively a commercial prospectus, where we can secure the investment attraction to deliver the project, get the successful outcomes, and of course share the learnings. So at that point, Kate, are you going to ask any questions at all or wait on it?
I really like the way you describe design thinking then, Robert, and the way in which it's so iterative and the number of people that are involved. And I think in terms of regional Australia, the place-based application is the real value add, that you're involving local networks and what they see as their future. So I thought that was really, really interesting. But I suppose this is where the rubber meets the road. I'm just thinking, how does this actually relate to funding a project? You've talked about that you get the funds, but can you tell us a bit more about how it relates to how design thinking relates to funding projects in Australia?
Yes, Kate. Sure, not a problem, because that really is, I suppose, the next logical step of working out that we have a process we can apply, but really, how could we actually step through that to deliver a place-based project? So what we've come across, I suppose, with the various projects we've been experimenting with, that there does seem to be a clear 10 steps to delivering a place-based catalyst project. And the interesting part of that is that particularly design thinking has really high leverage advantage in the first 6 steps, where we're going through taking the desirable idea, which is a commitment from locals. We focus on the key values and the changes we want, and then work out the big idea that might deliver all those and still align with local values. So there's a lot of value with design thinking, negotiating that through with your stakeholder groups. But also then we move in the feasibility phase. It's really quite interesting because that's where we're testing and validating the big idea, refining it down that it actually is becoming an idea that with enough credibility and market validation that it is worth investing the serious money for the business case, or you could say commercial prospectus, where we need the significant physical budgets, economic modelling to happen. But at least by that point in this process, you're really onto an idea that's been well and truly validated across those 5 sectors. So you've certainly de-risked the idea and actually enhanced its investability, which is always the key goal. The next 4 steps are fairly predictable, and we've all got a lot of skills in doing that. It's just important as it moves through those steps, again, we ensure the sort of design thinking round table of discussions continues, so we don't even have a great commercial prospectus, but then suddenly start drifting away from that focus. Now, probably an example I can quickly show here what that might mean on a project of economic development scale. There's, and this is some of the insights we've really got from some of the current projects we're working on, that at a certain scale, and you could say a precinct scale in an urban setting, we do always start from a place-based point of view with the local core values as far as identifying the community values, and particularly the community values that are important for the commercial and economic growth. So that's always a starting point. And then the other components tend to be fairly predictable in a way that if you're looking at any sort of catalyst precinct in a commercial centre, yes, it's place-based, there's community values, and the traditional planning components are, there will be some sort of open space, there's usually residential to some component, and there's a commercial mixed-use activity where often we focus for leveraging our key new jobs outcomes. But what's really interesting is that if we just stay at that step of effectively a patchwork of land uses, all we tend to do is reinforcing the old project approach of specialist siloed ideas, that we'll get all the best thinking of some commercial ideas or projects or investors we can plonk into the blue space, some great community development stuff we can plonk into the yellow, or some great nature-based environmental design work for the open space, and again some leading edge cutting residential design that can plonk into the pink, and somehow all that expert siloed advice resonates across the gaps and makes a vibrant centre. Well, it tends never to work that way, because really what we're looking at moving with the design thinking is more of a networked approach, and a networked approach is really achieved by looking at the overlapping areas, because your best ideas actually come from the edges, and design thinking helps you innovate in that space. The real innovation happens on how we come up with ideas that might be commercial and community. Where's the leverage point there? Where's the shared space? How it can move in either direction. It's the same with residential or open space. They're all about not so much having great disconnected ideas. They still exist in those spaces, but what can we do in the overlapping edges that really helps and leverages those connections and really creates the network? So, and if you're looking at that as really the edges of opportunity there, and when you're applying the sort of the round table approach of feedback loops, you've actually got that sort of effective tool of how you come up with better, bigger, layered and connected ideas that are going to be place-based, but certainly give you more leveraged outcome than taking the traditional production line process. So in a snapshot, that's probably the overview, and be happy to take any questions about it.
Well, thanks, Robert. That was very, very interesting, and I really got a sense of how you have to navigate your way through the spiral, adapting and iterating as you go. Unfortunately, we've run out of time for questions at this stage, but for those of you who are listening, can I encourage you to go to our website, www.segra.com.au, and join up for a Facebook, LinkedIn and our newsletter, and we will send out through those a link firstly to this recording, and then also to a podcast that Robert participated in the US earlier this month. So thank you again very much, Robert, for your presentation today, and I know it's a key theme on SEGRA's agenda for 2018 in Mackay. So if you've enjoyed this presentation, come to Mackay and you can hear more and meet with Robert. Thank you.
Thanks, Kate.